We have Senate Bill number 1, offered by Representative Guzzardi. Mr. Clerk, please read the bill.
Senate Bill 1, a bill for next employment. This bill was read a second time previous day. No commitments, no formants, no motions are filed.
Third reading. Mr. Clerk, Senate Bill number 1.
Senate Bill 1, a bill for next employment. Third reading the Senate bill.
Representative Guzzardi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise to present Senate Bill 1, the bill to raise the minimum wage in Illinois to $15 an hour. I'll keep this short because I suspect we'll have ample time during debate to discuss the details of this bill. The bill before you is very similar to a measure that we passed in this chamber 2 years ago. The bill raises the minimum wage gradually over the course of the next 6 years, beginning on January 1st of 2020 and ending at $15 an hour on January 1st of 2025. Contrary to what you may hear, or what we've already heard, as a matter of fact, today, the bill has been negotiated and deliberated over the course of years, including bringing in feedback from many people who had concerns about the bill. Part of that feedback is contained in the measure you see before you today. The bill creates a tax credit program for small businesses that are required to raise their wages to comply with the law that was brought to us at the behest of Representative DeLuca and some other members who have sought to address concerns of small businesses. In a concession to some of concerns that were brought up by members in suburban areas and concerns brought to us by the park districts, we've also created a new sub-minimum wage for seasonal employees who are under the age of 18. That minimum wage, I better get used to that phrase, will rise to $13 an hour by 2025. In short, this is a good bill. It's been thoroughly vetted and thought about for 2 years now, and it will provide substantive economic relief to 1.4 million Illinoisans. I believe this is one of the most important measures, if not the most important measure, that I'll have the opportunity to present before this body in my career here. I'm proud to carry this measure, and I look forward to a vigorous debate.
Chair recognizes Representative Batnick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Representative, you know, we were both a class of the 99ers, I'll call us, and I definitely enjoy talking policy with you. I think many of the people in the body are probably surprised to find out that we often agree where left meets right. This happens not to be one of those bills.
I'm sorry to hear that, Representative.
I'll also say that it was a lot more fun debating this during orientation when we were in the supermajority. But let's get into the thing that I liked about debating you, and I said this in my letter to many of you that I put on your desk. This is one of those policy issues, so I'm looking forward to a thorough policy debate. So I wanted to talk about some of the claims that were made about what the minimum wage is going to do and mean for the state of Illinois, and I just want yes or no answers on these, if that's okay. One of the claims I heard was that this should grow our population, that this is going to attract people to the state of Illinois because they have a higher minimum wage. Would you say that you agree with that?
I'm not sure that's a claim that I've made. I'm not sure what the research would suggest about that claim. Maybe, if you could stick to comments that I've made in the past, I'd be happy to explain those, or happy to answer any future questions you might have.
Okay, so to be clear, you're not going to make a claim on what it's going to do to the state's population.
I think I would be silly to promise you that by passing this bill, we're going to see the population of Illinois grow.
I'll rephrase it. Do you think that raising the minimum wage will push population growth in a positive direction, irrespective of other issues? Is this positive for population growth in the state?
Representative, I'm not sure I can give you a really good answer on that question. I'm not exactly sure what you're driving at. Maybe you can.
I believe it was the governor said that this is going to attract people to the state of Illinois because it's a higher minimum wage and it means a higher standard of living. So I just wanted to know if you think that that's going to be one of the impacts of this bill. I didn't expect this part of our debate to take this long, but it sounds like it's a no, that you have no claims on effect on population to the state.
I don't purport to make those claims here on the floor, no.
Okay. One of the other claims is it's going to help women and minorities, especially who are hurt by lower wages overall. Would you say that you support that claim?
Yes, I think, in fact, data bears that claim out quite strongly.
Okay. Would you say that it's going to inject money into underserved communities, more money in the underserved communities, more shopping, more stores, things of that nature?
I think that's a reasonable claim, yes.
Okay. So, and if this is a serious debate, if we can try to keep it quiet, folks, I'd really appreciate it. You sent us, Representative Worley asked you in committee about some studies, and I believe you sent us 2 yesterday, is that correct?
Yes, I sent Representative Worley a couple of studies, yeah.
Okay, so I would assume that those are the crown jewel, that you didn't send us the two worst studies, you sent us the two best studies that make your case.
Well, as a matter of fact, the thing I sent to Representative Worley was what they like to call a meta study. So rather than an individual study, what it does is it looks at the body of research as a whole and says there's been a whole bunch of studies on this issue, and they make these various claims, and the consensus among those studies reflects this or that.
Okay, well, let's talk. There's two studies you sent. You sent a meta study and you sent the Chicago study. And I heard the Chicago study bantered about quite a bit in committee. Let's talk about the meta study. The meta study talked about minimum wage increases since the 1990s. I think it's pretty safe to say that it studied a lot of smaller incremental increases. And I looked at study after study after study, things that were both for and things that were both against. I have all kinds of studies in my hand here that talk about small incremental increases in the minimum wage do not negatively affect unemployment. I'll also say that of those studies, they usually look at about a 2-year window. So to look at a mega study that talks about something going from 7.25 to 8.25 or 750 to 775, I don't think is pertinent here. Which is why I want to talk about Chicago, because you did send us Chicago, and you said, this is it. I heard another representative talk about it in committee. I've heard a lot of people banter about how it has had no adverse impact in Chicago. Is that correct?
I have a feeling you're about to say something to the contrary, Representative. Why don't you just go ahead and say it?
Well, you sent us the study. I want to know what you think if that's...
According to that research, it demonstrates that there hasn't been adverse effect in Chicago on employment, and in fact, there's been positive impact on wages earned, which is precisely the effect of the legislation we're hoping to accomplish. Put money in people's pockets without driving employment away.
Okay. So I have your study here, and I'm looking towards the end and the conclusion, and on page 27, it says, in general, an $11 per hour state minimum wage would ensure that all low-income workers achieve the same standard of living as a 13 per hour worker earning minimum wage in the Chicago area while minimizing economic distortions in low-cost areas of the state. There's two things your study that you sent me is saying. One, it's saying that there's a difference between Chicago and the rest of the state. It's also saying that if you get above $11 an hour, there's going to be some negative distortions. This is the study that you sent us.
I don't think that it's correct to represent a conclusion of that research that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would create negative economic effects on any community in the state of Illinois. I think that's a misrepresentation of the data presented in that study.
While minimizing economic distortions in low-cost areas of the state, it advocates, it says $11 an hour.
And, you know, our bill is going to raise the minimum wage to $11 an hour on January 1st of 2021. And it will continue to raise the minimum wage beyond that until it reaches January 1st of 2025, at which point the minimum wage will be $15 an hour.
Your same study says, okay, so it talks about 11, and you're talking about 15. There's a pretty significant difference there. And the other thing about your study is your study stopped at $10.50 an hour in the city of Chicago. It didn't talk about 15. And whether it be the meta study or this study, has there been a study done on the long-term effects of dramatic increases?
Well, it would be difficult to conduct a study on the long-term effects of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour because very few jurisdictions have had the minimum wage at that rate for a...
So you're admitting that we're in uncharted territory with what we're doing here. There are no studies that have evidence to support what we're doing here.
Listen, Representative, when we want to do something new, the only way we can predict how that new behavior is going to affect things is by looking at past behavior. And what I can tell you is there's been ample economic research, and the most credible and the most methodologically sound of that research has a very clear consensus, which is that raising the minimum wage does not have a net impact on employment. It doesn't drive jobs out of the state like you guys are going to say for the rest of the afternoon. It has no net impact on employment. All it does is put money in people's pockets who need it. It's a simple measure. That's why I'm supporting it.
Okay, so can you cite a study? You're talking about raising the minimum wage in Chicago from 8.25 to 10.50 is where the study is, which, you know, I live in Plainfield. Going from 8.25 to 10 doesn't do anything because even fast food teen workers are making near $10 an hour as an entry-level job. So a lot of that cushion just goes away. That's not a big impact. You're talking about the effects of raising the minimum wage to this study, the effects of raising the minimum wage to $10.50 in a booming city of Chicago during one of the biggest boom times the United States has seen. My question to you is, what you're doing downstate is you're forcing a quick 82% increase in the minimum wage, potentially during a recession. Now, I have two questions for you. One, do you have a study that's ever looked at the impacts of an 82% increase in low-income areas, rural areas? Do you have a study on that? And then if you don't have a study on that, because I'm pretty sure you don't, has that ever even happened before? Can you even point to an instance where the minimum wage has been raised 82% in a downstate area, in a rural area, during a recession?
Representative, we're doing something new here today. You're right. I appreciate you underlining that. We're taking bold and decisive action because we have for way too long allowed the minimum wage in this state to be a poverty wage, to be a wage that people can work full-time and yet live in poverty. That is indefensible, it's immoral, and it's wrong. So yes, what we're doing today is big. It's a big change. And it's a change that is well past due for the workers of this state. How do we plan for setting sail into uncharted waters? All we can do is rely on our experience. And what the experience of every jurisdiction that has raised the minimum wage has been, what the experience of the scientists who study this has been, the universal consensus of all the best research, that's the best thing we can go on. We could go, I suppose we could go on our gut or on our theory or on what we've heard.
I think you are going on your gut, actually, Representative, because it hasn't been studied.
I'm going on
science. There's not been any long-term studying. We've never done a big rapid wage increase, especially in downstate rural areas, where you're going to be raising the minimum wage to an amount higher than the median income for that entire county or city. Do you think jobs are going to magically appear in those areas where they're not already, where the median income is extremely low?
Representative, I don't believe in magic. I believe in data, and I believe in science. And the data and the science are unequivocal.
Okay,
on
show
this
me.
subject.
Here's what we're gonna switch here, because you cannot show me data because it doesn't exist, especially for downstate. So let's talk about Chicago. You talked about underserved communities being helped by this. You talked about women and minorities being helped by this. Let's talk about Chicago. Tell me why Chicago passed the minimum wage in 2014 to 2019. What's been the effect in those communities in the city of Chicago?
Well, according to the research representative, the folks at the very end, the very low end of the wage spectrum.
You're talking about the 2-year research, correct? I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about looking at 2015 and 2016. I'm talking about what are you seeing in the city of Chicago today?
Representative, I'm talking about the research that has studied the effects of employment and wages in Chicago since the minimum wage increase, which I think is what you're asking me about, but if it's not, I'm happy to talk about something else. The research that has studied the minimum wage increase in Chicago has again been very clear. It's shown that people who are earning low wages, who are by and large women and people of color, have seen more money in their pockets as a result of the minimum wage increase. They've seen, in fact, an increase in hours worked, an increase in employment in those communities. So it's been a boon for the citizens of Chicago, whom I represent, and who seem awfully happy about it.
So you say this has been a boon for Chicago, correct? Let me talk.
It has contributed positively to economic trends in the city of Chicago.
There is absolutely positive trends in the city of Chicago. Let's talk about it. Chicago's boom. It's real, it's big, and it's mostly downtown. That's a trend. It's mostly downtown. I didn't know the people on Michigan Avenue needed a minimum wage increase, okay? It's centered in the downtown area. Target closing 2 stores on the south side of Chicago, opening stores in more affluent areas. I don't think that was a trend you were referring to. I thought this was an underserved area that 5 years into a minimum wage increase, these places should be doing great, right?
Representative, here's what you're doing, and I think it's beneath the quality and integrity of your character. What you're doing is cherry-picking anecdotal evidence to refute data and statistics. I believe that you're better than that, because I've had a lot of debates with you over the course of the past several years. You know that anecdotes aren't statistics. The fact that 1 Target or 2 Targets have closed their doors is terrible for the communities in which they've closed. But it does not refute the macroeconomic data, which tells us very clearly that raising the minimum wage is good for workers and has no net effect on employment.
Okay, I think this is data. I think a headline that says, downtown gaining residents while people are leaving the south side and south suburbs in droves, that's anecdotal. That's anecdotal evidence.
Representative, it's very true that people have been leaving the south side and the south suburbs of Chicago. The causes of that, Representative, you also, I believe, understand the difference between correlation and causation. The causes of that out-migration from the south side of Chicago, if you can find me data to suggest that it's connected in any way to people getting paid more in those communities than they used to, I would be flabbergasted, but also very curious to see that data.
I would be very curious to see the data that shows it's helping.
I've already sent it to your colleague, Representative Worley.
You sent me something that was all Chicago and ended in 2016. It was a 2-year look at 1050. You're talking about anecdotal data. You're guessing. You're extrapolating from something that raised the minimum wage just to 1050, which was probably pretty close to the floor for most people in Chicago as it is. And then you're extrapolating that into a downstate city like Oakland, Illinois, and saying that everything's going to be fine if they go from 8.25 to 15. That's not data. That's not using any scientific evidence.
Is that a question, Representative?
All right, I'm gonna try to wrap up a little bit and go to the bill. Look, we've had it. The minimum wage was increased. The minimum wage was increased in Chicago in 2014. From 2010 to 2014, the population of Chicago was increasing. Since the minimum wage was increased, the population is decreasing. My point is, it's not this cure-all that we've been sold that it's going to do. That's number one. Number two, there is macro data that I've talked about. And there's two issues that I want to refer to. I talked to a temporary service agency, and one of the issues, everybody, this is important. I know this is long, but this is an important debate. I talked to a temporary service industry because I said, a staffing agency, what is going to happen? This might be a boom for staffing agencies because businesses are going to say, okay, I have to be at a skeleton crew and only ramp up during my busy time because of payroll costs. So I called one of the largest staffing agencies in Chicagoland, and the one thing she said unsolicited that I wasn't expecting was, I can't believe the number of people coming from the city of Chicago to the suburbs for temporary work. My point is the working poor are being pushed out. That's what the data, the longer term data is showing in the city of Chicago. So, to the bill, there are issues in the south side of Chicago, the south suburbs. If you didn't know that, I was born on the south side. I grew up in the south suburbs. I've seen directly what has happened there. If we're going to affect change in the city of Chicago and the rest of the state, it's about extremely high property taxes for manufacturers, which are disproportionately hurt because they have a big footprint. They have a big building. They've been driven out of Cook County in the city because of the high property taxes. It's about work comp costs. It's about the regulatory environment. It's about the political environment. Those are the things you need to do to bring good jobs and increase wages in the city and downstate. With that, I just have an inquiry of the chair. I assume we are on unlimited debate, Mr. Speaker?
We may have to go to a timer. You've been talking for 15 minutes, Representative.
I will close with vote no. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Ammons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one question to the sponsor, if the sponsor would yield.
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Thank you. Representative Guzzardi, during the process of working on the negotiations of this bill, did you work on looking at regionalization of the minimum wage and what impact that would have?
Thank you for the question, Representative. It may not be the last we hear of that subject today. The word was used at the negotiating table, and there were certainly folks suggesting the idea. And we opted not to consider that idea, and I'd like to explain why for just a moment, if I might.
Thank you.
And I don't have to tell this to you because you represent a community outside of the city of Chicago. Unfortunately, $8.25 an hour is not a living wage in your district or mine or Representative Badnick's or any other district in the state of Illinois. $8.25 an hour is a poverty wage in any corner of this state. If we want to lift people out of poverty, we need to pay people a fair and decent wage that respects the dignity of their work. That wage is no less than $15 an hour in any corner of Illinois. I would venture that it may be more in some parts of this state, and I think that the city of Chicago will be considering what it wants to do with its minimum wage going forward. But for the moment, I believe that the basic floor of decency and integrity is $15 an hour.
And just one final question to the sponsor of this bill. During your process of studying what the wage really should be as the basic floor, as you described it, did you find economic reports that indicated Illinois is probably a little bit behind what the actual wage should be throughout the entire state of Illinois.
Yeah, I believe that to be true, yes, that the $8, as I said, the $8.25 that people at the bottom of the wage spectrum are being paid right now, unfortunately, is considerably behind what's required to pay for the basic cost of living in any corner of the state.
Thank you. To the bill, I even argue that $15 is actually not sufficient according to economics of what we actually should have as a minimum wage in Chicago or the rest of the state of Illinois. I do want to first and foremost thank our House and Senate Joint Black Caucus Chairwoman, Senator Kimberly Lightford, for working on this for several years and bringing this to the House. I do want to thank Representative Guzzardi for staying committed to this issue and this idea of a statewide minimum wage, even for those of us who are considered in downstate Illinois. I want to recognize the Illinois working families who are facing significant existential challenges. Although unemployment rates are at a record low, in black communities that doubles in our communities according to the national average. So we are doing something significant, yet not quite enough to really pull people out of poverty. We've heard a lot about out-migration over the past years, and I believe much of that is due to the lack of resources and low wages that workers are paid in Illinois. And unfortunately, the last few years of political gridlock have starved many of our communities, especially black and brown ones. And many of those folks have left the state of Illinois looking for better opportunities. You've taken us from the bottom with this legislation. Those who are looking to live on full-time jobs. I want to make sure that people understand that a lot of these people making $8.25 or $8.50 an hour are working multiple full-time jobs. My mother was one of those people. And all of her working years, she could not afford to work one job in her home state. And even as she passed, as a woman who never owned a home, she worked hard to make sure that me and my siblings could actually one day own our own home and that we would have a decent living. I just want to say that there's an economist that he's quoted here to say, you've taken the folks at the very bottom and the people who are hard workers, full-time jobs, and you've made the economic conditions worse for them since 1968. And this is not the kind of economy and society that we want to live in. I want to thank the coalition of labor unions, community groups, faith-based organizations, student organizations, and individuals on the front lines of organizing in Illinois to achieve economic justice and economic parity. I do want to thank our current governor, J.B. Pritzker, and this administration for their strong commitment to raising the wage for millions of Illinoisans. I want to thank Governor Pritzker and my colleagues in this chamber that I recognize that this is a historic vote, and our vote and his signature truly means a significant transformation. And lastly, and most of all, it offers us a hope for a better life. Today, we will transform the lives of millions of people of this great state of Illinois. And with this vote, workers throughout the state can see a brighter future for themselves and meet their own basic needs, especially those living at the current minimum wage. Let this vote signify to all working people that you can make a change by organizing in your communities, and in spite of long-standing opposition, you can actually change what the future looks like for your children. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Guzzardi, and thank you to all the members who will support this initiative.
Members, everyone seeking recognition will be recognized, but going forward, we'll be moving to a 5-minute timer. Representative McSweeney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, to the bill. This is a well-intentioned piece of legislation, and I know the sponsor means good. But what's going to happen here is this is going to hurt people. This is going to reduce the amount of jobs in this state. And let's be specific about it. Let's start with the national retail firms, the national food service firms, who will look at Illinois, and they will make a policy decision that will say, we are going to do two things. Number one, we're going to increase automation. That means less jobs. Number two, we're going to move toward kiosks, and we're already starting to see that. And again, that means less jobs. And that will become a policy specifically for the state of Illinois and some of the other states that have done this. I don't favor this increase, but if you're going to be looking at an increase, it should be done on a national level. So all that we are doing here is putting Illinois at a disadvantage. And there is no doubt through automation, through kiosk, that jobs will be lost. That's number one. Then two is the small businesses that we all know and we've all heard from. And I know everybody in this room has heard from those small businesses. They have a strong attachment to their employees. They want to keep people employed. But what this bill is going to do is force them to do two things. One, force them to lay off people. And number two, force them to move people to part-time. Again, that means less jobs. And I think one of the biggest tragedies in this bill is the fact that this is going to limit opportunities for the young people of this state who are looking to start off while they're in high school, while they're young, to get a job that will give them experience, that will give them a leg up for the future, to be competitive in this global economy. Again, this will cost jobs. Another tragedy of this is going to be that for the increases that are actually going to be paid, it's going to result in cost increases. I mean, if anybody believes that these costs are not going to be passed on, that is absolutely false. They will. And what that means is that we're going to have higher prices for low-income people. So low-income people are going to be negatively affected by the following things: automation, kiosks, being moved to part-time, and young people aren't going to have opportunities. Why aren't we focused on creating jobs in this state? And why aren't we creating opportunity zones? At the federal level, there's an opportunity zone program for economically depressed areas where they're limiting the ability to increase taxes and specifically providing tax benefits for companies to locate. I am 1,000% in favor of that. Why don't we eliminate altogether the tax for pass-through entities, for corporations that actually are manufacturing in the state of Illinois? Those are good, high-paying jobs in the global economy. So as you think about this bill, think about the people who are going to lose their jobs. Think about the people who are going to be put at a disadvantage. I respectfully ask you to vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Murphy.
To the bill. I want to talk about how this bill will create lost opportunities for workers across the state of Illinois. In my career, I had the opportunity to hire many people, many times their first jobs. One of the great rewards I had was watching them develop, gain new skills, move up the ladder. Sometimes they took that skill set and moved on to another company, but it was very rewarding to see that. I could give you hundreds of examples of success stories, but today I want to talk about one. When Sam came into my diner asking for a job, I looked over his application and I said, "Tell me a little bit about yourself, Sam." And he said, "I just got out of prison. I spent the last 17 years in prison for selling narcotics." And he also added, "But that's not me today. That was me 17 years ago." So I looked at Sam and I said, "Today's your second chance. Don't let me down." Sam didn't let me down. He worked for me for many years until I sold my business. It was a great joy to watch him grow, not only as a worker, but become a productive member of society. Last October, Sam posted something on Facebook, and I want to share some of it with you today. He talked about that first day and how it changed his life. He talked about how working for me kept him clean. And he ended it by saying, "Thank you for the chance, because now I'm a supervisor for Pizza Ranch." My response to Sam was quite simple. I said, "Sam, the only thing I did for you was give you an opportunity. What you did with that opportunity was all you." I went on to congratulate him on his new job, but then really, I was impressed that Sam has taken time now. He mentors men and women who are coming out of the prison system to try to give them some of the life skills that he's learned working for me and being associated with others, and try to help them become more productive citizens. I shudder to think what would have happened if Sam came into my diner and this bill was in effect. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the job that I gave him would not be would not be in effect. It would not be there. I just would have had to eliminate that job. I cannot have a $30,000 a year busser working for me. That would have been a shame, not only for Sam, my diner, me personally, and possibly all the people he have mentored over the years. This will not only affect people in the restaurant business. I look back to my personal experience. In 1966, I worked for minimum wage for Paul Cody on his farm. He hired me for 3 years. Some of the life lessons I learned from Mr. Cody are still part of my core values today, and I look back on him and I thank him for that opportunity. Don't take the opportunities away from the people in the state of Illinois who need this. I'm going to close by reading the last thing that Sam posted on Facebook. Thank you for giving me the chance to make me a better person. Thank you. Your trust that I could do better inspired me to do so. Do not take the opportunities away from the Sams of the world who need it. Please vote no. Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Representative Meyer for 5 minutes.
Will sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates they will yield.
To the bill. Senate Bill 1 will hurt Illinois agriculture industry. The small family farms will suffer the worst, with the organic farms, orchards, vineyards, wineries, and livestock industry being the hardest hit of all. This state's extremely labor-intensive livestock farms, which are currently losing $10 to $20 per animal, and the dairy industry that we've lost 70% of our dairy farms in the last 22 years, 10% in the last year. Minimum wages increases all of our competitors' cost. But this doesn't happen with farm economies. Our economy, we can't add 10% on. Our farm prices are dictated to us by what's happening in the world. Foreign economies, carryovers, world harvest is what affects our prices, not what our inputs are. Our current prices right now are lower than they were 10 years ago. Our inputs have greatly increased over the same time. Farmers' net income has dropped for the last 5 years straight. This follows the tendency that happened in the 80s when many of our farms, the family farms, went bankrupt. We are on the road to that again. These family farms are often the high school and college students' first jobs. Illinois industries love to hire kids that have worked on family farms. They like the work ethic that they've learned working on these farms. On our farm, we have many people who have helped us over the years. The one is a dentist. The one is a surgeon who goes overseas and works with Hands for Hope in Liberia. A mechanical engineer, a mechanic, an electrician, and a stockbroker. We are all still good friends with these farmer employees that started working on our small family farm. They still appreciate what we did and how we helped them, and we're proud of what they've done. These jobs help keep our small towns alive. The current downturn in our small communities is getting worse, with many storefronts empty and numerous houses waiting to be raised as towns search for monies just to be able to knock these empty houses down in southern Illinois. Throughout southern Illinois, many towns have lost their mom and pop grocery stores. We just lost the longest operating grocery store in America that was family owned. 152 years of operating in Illinois, and it is now bankrupt. As more of these small town stores close due to the increased cost associated with minimum wage increases, our residents will have to make a 50 to 60 mile round trip to go to a grocery store, just to get to a grocery store in rural southern Illinois. Many of them don't even drive. These mom and pop grocery stores that can't afford the minimum wage would deliver food twice a week to these homes. Walmart's not going to do that on a 50 or 60 mile round trip. Just yesterday, friends of mine listed their grocery store for sale. They're tired of doing business in Illinois. The last grocery store in that town, the towns next to it, was the one that went bankrupt last month. They lost their grocery store. It seems crazy that farms and businesses that have survived Illinois for 150 years will not survive an 82% increase in the minimum wage dictated to them by people who have never done a payroll on their own account. Tax breaks only help farmers if there is income, not when there's zero profit. Agriculture has been the bright spot for the state of Illinois during an economic downturn. 400,000 jobs in the state of Illinois. Our largest employer is ag. This bill will hurt ag. It will make Southern Illinois suffer. Today, NASA announced a Martian rover named Opportunity no longer exists. I'm afraid Senate Bill 1 will mean Opportunity is over.
Representative, can you please make your final remark?
Please vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Zalewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question of the sponsor.
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Will, first I want to commend you on the work you've done on this. I know it hasn't been an easy lift. I know you've done your level best to balance this out, and along with Representatives Evans and Hoffman. I've been approached by social service agencies that are contracted by the state to do work on behalf of individuals for the state, and they're expressing gentle concern. And I think my question for you is, as we approach the budget in fiscal year 20, do you have a sense of what the advocacy will be to reconcile the increased costs they'll have with this new minimum wage, and how we're going to, and I know it's not just a question for you, but I think people would have a comfort level if we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing it up, and it's a really important question and one that we've thought a lot about as we've been crafting this legislation. So a couple of points about it. First of all, there will be, in the Department of Revenue's put together some numbers on this, there will be some additional revenue to the state as a result of raising the minimum wage by increase in income tax receipts, increase in sales tax, et cetera. So there will be some additional revenue to the state. But as you mentioned, there will be a cost to the state as well. And that cost is particularly going to affect those providers who the state contracts with, the very ones you're describing, who are currently only able to pay a very low wage because the state doesn't reimburse them at a high enough rate. And from the very beginning, when the new governor took office, he and his team have made this issue a priority, and they also have been very keenly aware of that particular problem. So I can tell you with confidence that the governor's team is aware of this problem, and that as they are crafting the budget that they're going to present next week, they are taking into account the need to raise those reimbursements, and they will present a budget that contemplates and includes a lift to those reimbursements in that budget.
I appreciate you making that part of the record. I'm happy to work with you on that in any way I can. To the bill, Mr. Speaker, I think we've worked on this matter a long time, and I think, quite frankly, this is as good as it gets in terms of balance and approach and doing the best we can for something that I think our constituents really want and something that's time has come. So I urge an aye vote, and I thank the sponsor for his work on this.
Chair recognizes Representative Dimmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Representative Guzzardi, thanks for your answers to the many questions we have today on the floor. I kind of want to piggyback off of the previous representative's questions about the impact this has on the state budget. What do you project? I know you said that the governor's office is aware of this circumstance. What do you, as a sponsor of this bill, project the impact will be on the state budget?
The most recent numbers I've seen suggest that in order to raise those reimbursements and keep those providers able to provide the services that they're doing while also meeting the requirements of the minimum wage increase, in the coming fiscal year, there will be roughly an additional $60 million in new appropriations that will be required.
$60 million, and it's important to note that your bill takes effect halfway through a fiscal year, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So we could say that $60 million in the first year, but then as the way your bill is structured, there's an increase again 6 months after that, and 6 months after that, and the year and the year and the year after that. So we're really looking at not just a one-time increase of $60 million, but really an annual onus on social service providers and nonprofits to come down to Springfield to ask for what will amount to, in the end, hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion in new state revenue being directed to pay these increased costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the onus won't fall to the providers, but rather to us to make them whole. And this happens a lot here. When we passed the new evidence-based model in a bipartisan way, urging the state to fund public schools at the rate that they deserve, one of the components of passing that legislation was a commitment to increase the funding year over year, to make sure that there's room in the budget, because we believe that full funding of public schools is a priority. And that's the same statement that I propose to make with this legislation, that paying providers, paying the people who are caring for the very most vulnerable in our state, paying those folks a decent living wage ought to be as much of a priority, and that we ought to find room in the budget to make sure it happens.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Speaker, to the bill. I think it's incredibly important that all of us in this General Assembly understand the financial commitment that's being made in this bill today. Every year, one of the most difficult votes that we have to take is on passing a state budget. We just heard this week from the new administration their projection for what next year's budget deficit is. This bill today adds hundreds of millions of dollars in new budgetary pressures that we'll have to deal with year after year after year. And if we don't come up with a sufficient increase in appropriation, if all those other priorities that we have are crowding out the funding that we need to give yearly rate increases to every social service provider in the state, guess who it falls to? It falls to social services, to nonprofits, to school districts, to local governments, to live up to the expectations that we've built into this bill. It puts incredible pressure on local governments, on schools, on nonprofits, on social service providers, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And it puts them in a position to come to this body every single year to not just ask for their funding to be protected, but to ask for hundreds of millions of dollars more. What we're doing here is a problem. The sponsor indicated the governor's office is aware of the problem. What's the problem? It's the problem we're creating with this vote here today. Let's not put ourselves again in this position of putting the cart before the horse. Let's not put ourselves in a position of creating a problem only to come back here in the last week of May and be in a more precarious position, in a more difficult way to reach a balanced budget. We don't need that extra pressure. We have billions of dollars of unpaid bills that already are upon our shoulders. Local governments have billions and billions of dollars in unfunded liabilities and budget deficits that they wrestle with every single year. We cannot afford the kinds of commitments that we're making here today. And to say that we're aware of the problem is insufficient, because today with this vote, we are causing the problem. Let's choose a prudent financial path. Let's have real bipartisan negotiations. Let's make a promise that's realistic for us to keep. Let's not yet again choose political expediency over the long-term interests of this state. Vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Bryant for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And ladies and gentlemen, will the sponsor yield?
The sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Thank you. I'm going to go directly to the bill, but I'm going to have some rhetorical questions because I'd like some of the members maybe just to think about these questions before they take a vote today. So my questions and comments really are to those who in this body who are going to be considering supporting this bill today. So question one is, representatives, do you on your desk or anywhere close to you have handy what would explain the potential economic impact to any of our 9 public universities? I'm guessing that that's a no, but you know what? I'm going to invite everybody to do this. If you have a yes answer to a question, just put thumbs up if you want to. If you don't, just a thumbs down or don't participate. But I'm going to ask the questions anyway. If not, why not? Haven't they been through a lot in the last decade or so? So we're trying. These are not questions. This is to the bill. So just asking everybody to kind of think about these. Yeah, it's okay. Will. It's all right. It's okay. No. So again, don't you agree that we should be working to return those public universities to stable economic conditions? That we should know the total financial impact to our institutions of higher education once this bill is fully implemented? Do you have projections year by year how this will affect them, members of the body? I don't have figures for all of them, but I do have some figures for the university system that I represent, that Representative Windhorst and I represent, and I have some figures for that same university because some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle represent that particular university as well. So let's consider the cost to the SIU system of raising minimum wage to $15. So when looking at SIU, at the university system as a whole, it's important to note that there are two classifications to consider, both the student employees and the civil service employees who would be impacted by the provisions of SB-1. The estimated cost, individually and combined, are for SIU Carbondale and SIU School of Medicine, which has approximately 2,353 student employees, based on current student employment. That cost would be an average of $665,000 annually. When fully implemented at $15, it would cost an estimated additional $5 million annually. For civil service employees, increasing the minimum wage to $15 would cost $990,000 annually, with a total estimated cost to just SIUC once fully implemented, an additional $6.9 million. So let's talk SIUE for a minute, because as I said, some of our friends on the other side of the aisle represent the area that SIUE sits in. So SIUE, in total, with student and civil service, estimated cost for the average hourly $1 increment. For every $1, it goes up $865,000. So a total additional SIUE estimated cost, once fully implemented, $5.8 million annually. Total increase in cost of the SIU system per year, $12.7 million. Cost to other universities once fully implemented, maybe we should each probably call them to ask for sure, but I have a few of those. EIU, once it's fully implemented, $6.74 million. ISU, $7.5 million. U of I, $70 million. Western, $4.382 million. Northern, $11.13 million, for a total, once fully implemented, to our already strapped university systems of $112.335 million in increased spending. Question 2. I represent a district that either includes or is geographically adjacent to Wren Lake Community College, John A. Logan College, Kaskaskia College, Shawnee Community College, and Southeast Community College. Do we have any figures that would explain the potential economic impact to these institutions? Yeah, I'm going to need more time. Do you have a figure available that would explain the potential economic impact of these institutions? Do you have any information available as far as how much money this will cost the whole community college system together? I think no. Or maybe you do know and don't care, but I don't think that's the case. That hasn't been the case with most of the folks that I know in here. Question 3, I'm hoping someone's going to yield me some time for.
Please make your final remarks.
Representative Severin wants to yield me some time. Is that permissible?
Representative Severin yields his time to Representative Bryant.
Thank you. And I'll try to finish quickly. Question 3. I have 32 school districts in my legislative district. Do we have any idea what this is going to cost K through 12 school districts? I contacted Murfreesboro because it's where I live, just because it's kind of a mid to small size district. $100,000 for Murfreesboro alone. Remember that the highest costs on our property tax bills are related to what? School costs. So in essence, we're going to be passing a bill that's going to force our property tax bills to go up. So let's move on. In deep southern Illinois, we've trouble with meeting our human services needs, mostly because of a lack of availability. So I'm just going to pick one because in the 100th General Assembly, I was the minority spokesperson for Department on Aging. Department on Aging for CCUs alone, this is $90 million of new spending per year with about $1.5 billion in new spending. And then we have other state agencies that are going to be involved. But let me go on to employers. So I have a letter from a business that is in deep southern Illinois, happens to be in Chester. And this is from Don Welge, who owns Gilster Mary Lee. I would again like to, and this is quoted from his letter, I'd again like to take the liberty to write you about the $15 an hour minimum wage being discussed in the legislature and supported by Governor Pritzker. I understand the support for the $15 an hour minimum wage in Chicago, where data I've seen shows the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment at over $1,800. However, in that minimum wage is put forth across the entire state, many downstate and rural Illinois businesses would be forced to either close or move to other states. This would be especially true here in southern Illinois, where the average rent for an apartment in Carbondale, one bedroom, is $600 a month. This goes on to talk about how he's the largest employer, fourth largest employer in southern Illinois, and that basically he has 6 businesses in Illinois and about 10 or more others in other states, and that he would basically move his businesses from southern Illinois across the river into Missouri. And again, that's because they have a small profit margin. So I'm going to go on quickly because I know I'm going to run out of time again. This is just one employer, but I think Mr. Welge did a very good job of putting all of that together. So my question again, number 4, is we have till January 1st before this is implemented. Why the rush? We know why the rush, because there's been an arbitrary date put that that the governor wants this passed prior to the State of the State address, so he can sign it before then. I don't think that that's an adequate reason to do that. And then I just kind of want to, I have a couple other things, but I'll skip over those. Just kind of getting to the end, I heard that the sponsor, basically, there's a quote where the sponsor said, it's the state's job to step in when the invisible hand of capitalism isn't supporting people. Well, I'm going to say that the heavy hand of socialist policies, which is transferring money from one person to another against their will, doesn't work. I would ask Castro, Chavez, and Chavez and Maduro how that works. These are statist policies and they don't work. I would ask for a no vote.
Members, can we please be respectful of the 5-minute timer? We will no longer be yielding time. Representative Davidsmeyer is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates they will yield.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to ask you to be brief because I only have 5 minutes and Joe won't yield me any time anyway. So, do you know the state of our nursing home, nursing care facilities right now in the state of Illinois?
I'm familiar with the state of some of them, but why don't you enlighten us, Representative?
Yeah, so over about the last year, about 25 nursing homes have closed in the state of Illinois, and they're already coming to us asking for an additional $200 million. Do you know the impact of this on nursing care facilities?
The impact of the closure of those facilities?
No, the impact of the $15 minimum wage, what it will cost them.
Representative, I believe that those facilities, those who are caring for the most vulnerable in our state, particularly the people who are on the front lines of that care, deserve to make a decent wage. And the state has a responsibility to compensate those providers in such a way that
Okay,
they pay a decent
I'm going to interrupt you. I only have 5 minutes, and I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to keep going. $50 million if no one else gets a raise. So $50 million if nobody else gets a raise. So what's happening in a nursing home, if nobody else gets a raise, you're taking somebody who's currently making $15 an hour, who has worked their way up to $15 an hour, and you're moving them down to the minimum wage. That's the essential result of what's happening if they don't get the commensurate raise. So if they don't get 80% over the next 5-6 years, 80% raise, you're actually taking them down to the minimum wage, taking people who are in middle class and moving them down to lower middle class. Do you know what a food desert is?
I sure do, yes.
I've heard the word food desert from a number of folks on your side of the aisle. I want you to know that I have food deserts in my district.
It doesn't surprise
In
me at
rural
all.
areas, it's 10 miles from a place to purchase food, and I believe in urban areas it's 1 mile. I would give my left leg for a place 1 mile from where I live. But I want you to know, and the speaker is actually, the gentleman in the speaker's chair knows some of my friends from Scott County, from Winchester, Illinois. Their grocery store recently closed, and the nearest place to purchase groceries is about 15 to 20 miles away. And so a group of local citizens got together not to start a business to make money, but to provide a service. And they are breaking even. They have a small little market. It's got a small deli counter. It's probably the size of a small freshman office here in the Capitol. So it's a very small place. If this goes through, they won't be able to afford to keep it open. Right? These are young people who have stepped up to do the right thing for their community, and they can't afford to raise their families and support a business that's losing money. So you're creating food deserts. I'm gonna bring up another one: prescription deserts, right? Pharmacies in rural Illinois, especially in my district, the big pharmacy companies are not going to move into a town of 2,000 people. Right? We have to provide opportunity. I've got a friend who has, over the last 3 or 4 years, has spent a lot of his own income putting pharmacies into these small towns, finding a pharmacist that will travel to these small towns. And what we're doing is we're making sure these places are closed because they're being reimbursed at rates that the big guys can handle, but the small guys can't.
You won't hear any quarrel from me on that point, Representative. I think that what's happening to particularly independent pharmacies in Southern Illinois,
I've only got 1 minute.
Oh,
I want to say, what happens to grandma on Social Security? Is she going to get an 80% raise? Have you talked to your congressman? Have you talked to your congressman?
I haven't, Representative.
I am concerned because they're already barely getting by, right? And we can agree on that.
Yes.
So how is she going to deal with the increase in cost? And if you don't believe there's an increase in cost of living, I think that you're a little out of sync with.
Is this
reality.
finally a question I can answer, Representative? Because I'd love to.
If I can get an extra minute, I would love to.
No sweat. We'll have this conversation another time, sir.
So in Seattle, really quick, Seattle, when they went to $11 an hour, there was a small difference. It didn't make a huge difference because a lot of people.
Final remark, Representative.
Thank you. A lot of people were already making close to that $11, so there wasn't a huge impact. But when they went from, over 1 year, when they went from $11 to $13, they said that low-wage jobs, hours worked in low-wage jobs went down 9%, while hourly wages went up 3%, and the average person working minimum wage received at least $75 less per month because of the decrease in hours. And so I think that we're trading dollars for hours. Business and employers are going to say, we're going to cut everywhere we can. And I appreciate the extra time, and I urge a no vote. Let's do a thoughtful process on this. I think we can do this the right way, but you are killing downstate Illinois, who severely wants to be a huge part of the state's economy. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Evans. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will now take 5 minutes. A couple of questions for the sponsor.
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Thank you, Speaker and sponsor, and thank you, Representative Guzzardi, for your hard work on this issue and advocacy for just real working class people. Just a couple of questions. I'm hearing a lot of conversation about the suddenness of this, and I want you to remind me, are we passing for $15 to take effect tomorrow or next month, or when will the $15 take effect?
No, this is a gradual increase in the minimum wage that will arrive at $15 on January 1st of 2025.
Is this an increase that you negotiated with? I know I was there because you remind the body and all those listening about the negotiations and how you sat down as an advocate yourself, but also open to our business interests around the state.
Sure, and thank you for bringing that up. We had extensive negotiations on this bill with folks from business and folks from labor and folks from the legislature, and I think there was strong demand for a faster ramp, especially because we passed a bill 2 years ago that would have gotten the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2022. So I think there were a lot of folks, particularly lower income folks, people who are at the bottom of that wage spectrum, who are saying, we need something faster. And as a part of the negotiation, the push and pull and dialogue around this bill, we settled on a ramp that will be over the course of 6 years, which I believe is a balanced compromise.
And my final questions before my closing remarks. Who is a minimum wage worker? I think sometimes we have a view of the minimum wage worker. Is it who is this individual? Could you give us an explanation of the average minimum wage worker within the state of Illinois?
Yeah, I think the average minimum wage worker, it's not what most people have in mind. The average minimum wage worker is a woman of color in her 20s or 30s and is likely to have children. So, you know, these are people who work in the healthcare field, who work in the services sector, and it's not the teenager flipping burgers at the Dairy Queen. The average minimum wage worker is someone trying to provide for their family, and at this minimum wage, unfortunately, they're certainly not able to.
Thank you, Representative Guzzardi, and to the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, we're standing up for the working class folks, not $100 million for individuals, not something that's unreasonable. We're talking about the minimum wage. We're talking about a gradual minimum wage. We're talking about a negotiated wage. Please stand with Will Guzzardi, the co-sponsors. Stand with the people of the state of Illinois and vote for this very reasonable negotiated bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Ramirez for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, Representative Evans, you asked who is the minimum wage worker? It's my mother. And it has been my mother for the last 25 years. And so when we're talking about raising the minimum wage, for me, it's actually a personal issue. It is why it gives me such great pleasure to stand in support of Senate Bill 1. Will this bill help working families? Absolutely. As a new member, I am happy that the first bill I will be speaking in support of on this floor is such an important piece of legislation to so many working people across the state, like my mother. At its core, the issue we're discussing today is about equity. And as Representative Villanueva so eloquently put it yesterday, it is about dignity. It is about justice. We are discussing how we value the work of low-income workers. We are discussing how we value the work of working families, of low-income women. Frankly, that work is worth far more than $15 an hour that we're debating today, but it is certainly a good start. As the former director of a homeless social service agency, I know what it's like to work with people experiencing homelessness. I also know what it's like to want to raise the minimum wage for my employees and the challenges that come behind that. I know parents like Victoria who came into my organization and had to work 2 jobs just to be able to get out of homelessness, to pay childcare, to be able to send their children to school, and to be able to pay basic utilities. You see, for her, it never felt like she could work enough hours in one day to keep her family from homelessness. Today's vote is for the many Victorias across the state of Illinois that are still underpaid and at the verge of homelessness. Our vote today to increase the minimum wage is an important step towards ensuring a living wage for all Illinoisans. While let me be very clear, this legislation does not completely get us to a living wage. It is a critical step in addressing decades, listen to me, decades of growing income inequality. This is particularly true for African American workers, of which more than 48% of them make less than $15 an hour, and more than 61% of Latino workers making less than $15 an hour, like my mother. For too long, corporate profits have seen record increases, while workers' wages have remained stagnant. I am encouraged today that Illinois is taking a lead in being one of the first states to pass a $15 minimum wage. I also want to acknowledge that this victory today doesn't mean our work is done. We actually have a long way to go. but I look forward to the day when I can stand in this chamber as your colleague, voting in support of a fair minimum wage for all workers. I also want to recognize that for many workers in Chicago, where I serve, this bill will only have a marginal impact many years from now. That's not acceptable for me, and I am committed to working with my local city council members to ensure that workers in Chicago have a fair minimum wage that accounts for local cost of living differences and that we reach $15 an hour in the next few years. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart my colleague and neighbor in Chicago, Representative Guzzardi, as the chief sponsor, and Senator Lightfoot for all their work leading up to this moment. I want to thank our elected officials, Governor Pritzker, but more importantly, I want to thank all of the workers who made it out today to make sure that they could be here to say how critical, how important, how right now we need a minimum wage raise. So thank you to 15 for All, thank you to SEIU, and to all the labor advocates. Truly, it's been a long time coming, what feels like endless conversations, rallies, and advocacy work, but the day is here for all Illinoisans, and I'm anxious to press that button. Let's make it happen.
Chair recognizes Representative Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill, one of my favorite things on the floor is to engage in repartee with my good friend, the sponsor, but since most of my questions were answered, or I heard answers yesterday in committee, I will just rehash what many of you did not get a chance to hear in committee. We talked about several things, and I'm going to specifically mention and focus on the tax credit that is supposedly included in this bill. I'll read from you one of the provisions. It says, full-time equivalent employees mean the ratio of the number of paid hours during the reporting period and the number of working hours in the period. I asked what that actually meant, and I got no answer. Another one, an employee may not claim a credit for an employee who has worked fewer than 90 consecutive days immediately preceding the reporting period. Now, one of the things I learned in law school was the fact that there's a rule of statutory interpretation that says, if possible, you must use the plain language of the statute to interpret what that means. So if I use the plain language of this statement, no, an employee may not claim a credit for an employee who has worked fewer than 90 consecutive days immediately preceding the reporting period. I read that as 90 days in a row, and except for dairy farmers, I don't think there's anybody who works 90 consecutive days in a row. Full-time equivalent, this question was brought up by one of the witnesses who said, full-time equivalent doesn't tell us anything. Is full-time equivalent a 40-hour week, a 30-hour week, a 50-hour week? There's no way to calculate it. There's no way to calculate it because you don't understand what the actual number is you're shooting for. So those three things stuck out in debate yesterday with regard to the credit. There's a question in here, do salaried employees count toward the determination of full-time wages? There's nothing in here. What was left here was the answers that we got from the sponsor of this bill and those who were in favor of the bill said that, yes, it is an imperfectly drafted bill. There are a lot of things in here that need to be done after the bill is passed. Now, and the incoming director of the Department of Revenue said that, well, these inconsistencies are something that can be rectified by the rules-making process in JCAR. As a member of JCAR, I think this is this is bad, because JCAR is there to be the last line of defense against imperfectly drafted legislation, and this is going to be a nightmare of regulations to try to interpret improperly and inelegant legislation. Finally, this is a political bill, if nothing for no other reason than the fast track upon which this bill has been made. The governor, He won the election. He wants to have this bill on his desk. He wants to have it signed so we can all stand up and applaud when he comes in next week. But the fact remains is this bill is not ready for, it is not ready. And if it's going to take effect on January 1st of 2020, it will take effect on January 1st of 2020, whether we pass it today or whether we pass it in May. So what I would say is, to put this bill, which is going to have such a huge impact, as we've heard from my, especially downstate colleagues, to put something like this on the table with so little thought, with so little effect, to, you know, it's just poorly drafted, folks. This bill needs time to cook. It needs to become soup. It is not soup. At this point, I would urge the sponsor, in spite of his desire to make everything look good for the governor next week, please pull this bill. Let's talk about it. Let's do it. Let's do it right. Let's bring all the stakeholders in. Let's do this right. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Worley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. Yesterday in committee, we heard several fatal flaws in how this bill was drafted, and one that I brought up yesterday was that it does not allow for waivers under FMLA for those that do piecemeal work. And since our debate 24 hours ago in committee, I've been contacted by several lawyers that do this work, and they gave me a couple cases to reference. Because if this bill passes the way it does, those people that get waivers will no longer get them. I'd like to interject into the record a case out of the 7th Circuit right here in Chicago, 2013 case, Patriotic Veterans, Inc. versus Indiana. The fact that, and I quote, "The fact that a state has more stringent regulations than a federal law does not constitute federal preemption. We know that states frequently and without preemption by federal law create more stringent laws regarding minimum wage, employment discrimination, educational standards, gambling, and highway safety, to name a few." That's case law that's on the books right now. There's also an Attorney General's opinion out of Arizona when they passed their minimum wage increase. The opinion stated, and I quote, "Developmentally disabled workers are not exempt from the minimum wage enacted in their minimum wage law. Thus, developmentally disabled workers formerly earning a sub-minimum wage under the FMLA special certificate are entitled to earn the state minimum wage." Why is that important here today? In my community, my hometown, the town I was born in, is an organization called Little Friends. Little Friends does wonderful work with those with intellectual disabilities. One of the things they provide through Spectrum Services located in Downers Grove, Representative Ann Stava-Murray represents Spectrum. In talking with them today, if they have to pay this minimum wage, 175 people with intellectual disabilities will be out of a job. Representative Stava-Murray, a yes vote. Please be able to explain that to the parents and those people with intellectual disabilities who will be out of a job because of your yes vote. But it's not just that. It's also property tax impact. This also applies to community colleges. College of DuPage, located in Glen Ellen, Representative Costa Howard's district, will see a $1.5 million impact. That doesn't go to fees. It will go straight to property taxes, which in the collar counties are vitally important that we drive them down, not up. Same thing applies to Representative Sam Yingling's district. College of Lake County has indicated...
Shh, members, please keep the noise level down. Representative Worley.
Thank you. College of Lake County has indicated that this bill will have an impact of $1.1 million. That goes straight to the property taxes in Lake County. But businesses can be reasonable. Matrix Plastics, located in Representative Pappas' district, has simply asked for more time. They can do a minimum wage if done incrementally. But those requests have fallen on deaf ears because we are trying to ram this through in warp speed for political purposes. Reasonable heads can come together and solve these problems when we're included to have a seat at the table. We've been shut out of this process. It is being rammed through for political reasons. That's unacceptable. It's why Illinois is in the financial state that it is in. Mr. Speaker, Should this bill receive the requisite number of votes, I request a roll call verification.
Members, a verification has been requested by Representative Worley. Please be at your seat to vote your switch. Chair recognizes Representative Martwick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Thank you. Representative Guzzardi, I've been listening to this debate today, much as I listened yesterday during the hearing in the Labor Committee, and I'm finding some interesting things about some of the statements from our friends on the other side of the aisle. So let me ask you a question. Can you tell me exactly and specifically what the economic effect of this bill will be?
It's very hard to say with exact specificity.
Fair enough, because we really, I mean, at some point you have to make a decision, you have to go forward, right? It's hard to say exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know.
Right.
But how do you base that decision then on what we should do for tomorrow?
You know, in my experience, my admittedly short experience in life, you can make some reasonable assumptions about what will happen in the future based on patterns of things that have happened in the past.
And yet, our colleagues have said, and I've heard these, and I quote unequivocally, you will create food deserts. You are creating pharmacy deserts. You are ensuring that places are going to close. Do you know that to be true?
I certainly don't, Representative.
So a lot of those statements are based on an economic theory that says if you raise wages, then the job market will shrink or costs will go up, prices will go up, and so these negative effects. So they are theorizing based on a school of economic thought that this will be the income or the outcome of this bill. Have you ever heard any economic theories that would contradict that theory?
Yes, Representative. There's a pretty robust school of economic theory as far as I know, and again, I don't purport to be an economist, but it's my understanding that there's a pretty robust theory of field of economic theory that suggests that by raising the wages, what you do is inject dollars into local economies and cause economic benefit.
In fact, there is quite a robust school of thought that says that by enriching or improving the conditions of those at the bottom, that they're going to spend every disposable dollar that they have, and that will increase spending on consumer goods and will drive demand. And it's a different school of thought. But when we make these decisions, we can contemplate those theories, but wouldn't it be best if we made our decisions based off of available data?
That's how I prefer to operate, Representative.
Have you seen any study that says that the doom and gloom predictions that they're making has ever happened when there's been a minimum wage increase?
You know, as I said earlier, there's a few outliers on both ends of the spectrum when it comes to economic impacts of minimum wage increases. Some say there's a good deal of economic growth. Some say there's a good deal of economic decline. But the consensus, especially of the most methodologically sound and the best studies, the consensus shows there's essentially zero net impact on employment.
When we had the subject matter hearing a week ago, we heard from a professor from the University of Illinois, a professor by the name of Mark Dussard, who is an associate professor of urban and regional planning, and he's got a PhD from the University of Illinois. And he talked about this voluminous wave of research that shows minimum wage increase has no negative impact on unemployment or job growth. And he specifically cited a study that was done by Dube, Lester, and Reich, not our Reich, but a different Reich, that compared where minimum wage increases happened on border communities. So they shared the almost identical, in some cases identical, economic conditions, except on one side of a border they increased the minimum wage, and the other it stayed stagnant. And yet they found no negative impact whatsoever, and even positive impact in certain situations.
Sounds like a thorough and well-researched study.
And this was backed by the study for the city of Chicago, which in the study about the city of Chicago's minimum wage, they said that the positive impact of the increase in the minimum wage actually brought up the economy even in areas around Chicago that didn't raise their minimum wage, but they said it would raise their economies even more had they adopted the same minimum wage increase as the city of Chicago. And so this is the data that we have out there. And so when we look to make a decision on something like this, we really ought to rely on the data. And the data overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that a raise in the minimum wage will have positive economic effect. And therefore, I respectfully request an aye vote.
Chair recognizes Representative Villanueva.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. During the last 10 years, basic living expenses like healthcare, food, housing grew, while the minimum wage remained the same. A loaf of bread, a gallon of milk doesn't cost the same as it used to. But even outside of that fact, things have changed, and we as a body have to understand that the status quo, the current minimum wage, just isn't enough. When 48% of black workers, 61% of Latino workers, and 46% of female workers earn less than $15 an hour in Illinois, we have a problem. We have a problem with the way that we value our low-wage workers. We have a problem with the way we value what low-wage workers look like and what it means. I said it yesterday in committee, and I'll say it again. This bill isn't just about raising a minimum wage. This bill is about dignity. Folks that are working full-time in our state should not be forced to decide between putting food on the table for their family or being able to make rent at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month. I wanted to share a very quick personal anecdote. Last week, I was speaking with my mother, and she was telling me that her and my father were doing some very early spring cleaning. And in a box, they found some documents of theirs from back in the 80s, which I know for some folks aren't back in the day, but for me it is, of when they were minimum wage earners, earning $3, something around $3 an hour, my mother earning slightly less than my father. I don't remember the first 10 years of my life where my parents were actually in my life during daylight because they were minimum wage workers working several jobs. McDonald's, a trip to McDonald's was a birthday treat. It wasn't an everyday occurrence. It wasn't a weekly occurrence. This was something we did maybe once a year because we were working poor. We lived with my grandparents along with the rest of my very expanded Mexican family because we were working poor. When we talk about this bill, when you talk about the money in the institutions, when you talk about everything else that will be affected by this, what we are talking about are human beings. People that deserve the respect and the dignity to spend time with their children instead of having to work 20 hours a day to make ends meet. I bring up my story because my story is like so many other people's stories. When we talk about people, minimum wage just being the beginning of what they earn, what we don't take into consideration is there's a lot of dumb luck, a lot of privilege that goes into people earning more than just the minimum wage. This vote is just the first step. It's never been the end for me because I've been in this fight with the workers that are standing up in the gallery with us. I was with them in 2014 when we were working on the campaign to raise the minimum wage. This one is personal for me. Taking this vote is a first step in getting to somewhere near close a living wage, because let's face it, this is not a living wage. Like Representative Guzzardi said, this is the basic floor of decency. But this raise is a step in giving people a fighting chance to live, not just to survive. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for taking the hot seat to answer all these questions with grace and dignity and a little bit of sass. But most importantly, to the workers up here who didn't waver in their commitment and dedication to this issue, because for them, this is personal. This one is for you, because of you, and because of your sacrifice. I urge a yes vote from all of my colleagues.
Chair recognizes Representative Stava Murray.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to go next because it was so wonderful. Thank you, Representative Villanueva. And thank you, Representative Ramirez. Thank you, Representative Ammons. Thank you to so many of my amazing colleagues who have been fighting this fight so much longer than I have. Thank you to every single person who came here today for the fight for 15. Because there are those who would say that I should vote no, and they don't know my community. Because I did a poll, and we lean yes on this. So thank you to every single person, because I know that my constituents might not have been here today sitting next to you, but we appreciate your fight, and we are grateful for your work, and we see you, and we know that you deserve this dignity that Representative Villanueva has spoke on. And I would urge all those in my area who say that our people don't have the empathy to understand why this is important, to think about your action on this button, because the majority of people in our district, in our area, want you to vote yes.
Chair recognizes Representative Welch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill, I rise today in strong support of raising the minimum wage. I rise today because this is not just a fight for $15. I rise today because it is a fight for families. This is a fight for families all across Illinois. Many of the people that are standing here today saying that this will hurt social services, hurt our universities, and hurt our community colleges are some of the same people who didn't bother to vote to break the 736-day budget impasse that caused unprecedented harm to our social services, universities, and community colleges. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle also keep asking, what's the rush? Why are we trying to ram this through? Can't we slow this down? Why can't this wait? Where have we heard that before? Those are the same questions people asked Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s when he was fighting for civil rights and fighting and leading the Poor People's Campaign. And Dr. King told them then why we can't wait. People should not go to work 40 hours a week and still not be able to put food on their table. People should not work a full-time job and still experience homelessness. People should not work every day and still live below the federal poverty line. This bill helps our entire state. The cost of living for working families across Illinois is rising, and a $15 minimum wage is necessary for families across the state just to make ends meet. In East St. Louis, in Peoria, in the Quad Cities, in DuPage County, it helps everyone across this state. Dr. King said, there is nothing but short-sightedness to prevent us from guaranteeing a livable income for every American. Let's not be short-sighted today. Let's think about the long-term health of those poor families across this state. We can't speak for every American, but we can start by speaking for every Illinoisan, no matter what region they live in. No matter what part of this state, east or west, north or south, you have a chance to speak for them today. You can tell them when you go to work, you can pay your rent. You can buy food. You can put clothes on your kids' backs. That you can have the decency when you go to work. Mr. Speaker, let's pass this bill today, and let's raise the wage and return decency to working families across this state. I ask that we vote yes on Senate Bill 1. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Halpin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a representative of downstate Illinois, and I'm going to support this bill because Illinois low-wage workers are long overdue for a raise. In my district, as the previous speaker mentioned, a single person with no kids today needs nearly $13 an hour to meet their bare needs. And again, that is a community in downstate Illinois. It's not Chicago. And by the time the ramp that's in this bill even gets to $13, that worker is going to have fallen further behind. And that doesn't even count workers with children or couples that are with families that are low-wage workers. Their expenses are much, much higher. So when we talk about regional rates, that type of plan, it wouldn't work for our community. It still wouldn't do enough. And I won't repeat the other arguments for why we should pass this bill. They're good arguments. But I do want to add something else. Many, many workers in my district and across the state of Illinois will be helped by this bill. And I'm convinced that on the whole, it'll benefit my district in the state of Illinois. But I'm not so naive as to think this won't hurt anyone. Some of the sky is falling claims that we hear are overblown. But there are businesses, particularly in my district, in my home of the Quad Cities, on the border of Iowa, that might choose to lay off employees or cut back employee hours or even close or move across the river. I don't take those concerns lightly. But to be clear, companies don't make that choice based on the minimum wage alone. And I think it's about one thing above all others, which is property taxes. It's about 30 years of not paying for our pensions or not giving enough money to our local schools and our local community colleges, which forces our local officials to rely ever more desperately on those property taxes. And so I would just ask you all today, no matter how you vote on this bill, please commit to doing something that the folks before us haven't done for a while, and make a plan to fix and pay our pension debts, to support our schools, support our local governments, so we can get real property tax relief, not gimmicks, and not just help border communities like mine, but help the entire state of Illinois. I thank you for the time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes Representative Freeze for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Representative, we've had this discussion a number of times over the past couple of years, as you mentioned earlier. And my questions back to you have always been in regard to the district that I represent. And I was given some information that about 66% of Illinois residents live within 40 miles of the Illinois border. In the district I represent, I don't know if that's true or not. I've read it. Somebody gave it to me. But I can tell you, in the district I represent, 100% of the people live within 40 miles. Matter of fact,
mine too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm talking about 75% of them live within 3 or 4 miles. So I get, as everyone does, emails, phone calls from those small businesses, large businesses, agribusinesses concerned about being put at a competitive disadvantage. Can you address that for me one more time, please? Because I'm still getting it. I don't have apparently the correct answer for those businesses. Can you help me out?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is it would be easy to speculate about this on one side or the other, as we've done a lot of today. To speculate that this will have adverse economic impacts for a community like yours, or conversely to speculate that we'll have positive economic impacts on a community like yours, that folks will look at your community and say, boy, I can make a much better wage living and working there than I can across the border. Maybe that's a place where I should start my family and raise my family.
So,
again, we could speculate on either side here. But I'm not a big fan of speculation. As I've said, and I know y'all might get tired of even hearing me say this, I'm a fan of data and research and empirical evidence. And we make plans for things like this, it's best to reflect on what's happened in the past. And the record is just unequivocal that on net, when you raise the minimum wage, you don't see a loss of jobs. That's just what the record tells us.
We had that yesterday, I believe, in committee, where we had the discussion of what some studies have shown. And then we had the actual, what I felt compelling evidence from some of the business owners that's going through some of the the grief that they've been going through trying to pencil the numbers to make it work. Now, I don't know. I don't know your background. Have you run a business? Have you started a business?
I haven't.
Okay, so businesses are concerned if they're dealing with the public, they certainly don't want to let people go. They don't want to let labor down because they need people to be in touch with people to keep the service rate up, right?
Sure, yeah.
So how else would you suggest that they make ends meet if their wage cost is going to go up, what is it, 33% in just the first year that this is in effect?
What I'd say again here is that we can trade anecdotes right back and forth, because I can tell you that all the business owners in my district are paying considerably above $8.25 an hour because they're in Chicago and the minimum wage is higher. And
I'm talking about those.
I'm just telling you that what they've found as the minimum wage in Chicago has gone up is that they've been able to keep pace, and in fact, folks in our community go out to eat more. They go patronize our local shops more. So they've seen increased economic activity as a result. So again, rather than your anecdotes and my anecdotes, or the previous witnesses and the next witnesses, I prefer to reflect on the macroeconomic data, which again speaks very clearly to these concerns.
Well, you might consider this anecdotal too, but Mr. Carr from the Retail Merchants Association testified and just kind of breached on a little bit the other day in committee about an incident that happened within the district that I represent. And that is when the flood came and closed the bridge, our gas stations, our service stations, noticed a 200% to 300% increase in business because nobody was going across that bridge and buying the discounted gas across the river. Right? So we know that people vote with their dollars, they vote with their feet. Those are the concerns that the businesses in my district have. We may continue to have steady employment throughout our region, but our region's going to see perhaps increased employment on the other side of the river, which doesn't do Illinois any good. Can you see that point?
Yeah, I suppose I could imagine that outcome. I could also imagine an outcome that's quite different from that, where
Well, this is real life. This is what happened, and it happened several times.
You mean the gas station example?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And there are certain goods and services which are more easily traveled to and purchased, right? If you're already, for instance, traveling across the border to commute, for instance, for work, then you might choose to fill up over there rather than at home. Whereas if you had to drive 40 miles to get to a gas station with 10-cent cheaper gas, you might...
Representative Freese, can you please make your final remark?
Sure, and I appreciate that, Representative. And the state of Illinois drives people in from my district across that river for more than just gas. We drive them for a number of different things, and I'm afraid this is one more. And so I would urge a no vote.
Chair recognizes Representative Bennett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate your patience today. This has been a good day, a long day, a chance to number of things. So, again, appreciate your help. Will sponsor yield, please?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
Thank you. I would like to applaud Representative Gazzardi, as we mentioned yesterday, for wanting to help Illinois workers. That's important to do.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. If you wouldn't mind speaking closer to the mic.
I applaud Representative Gazzardi in wanting to help Illinois workers. Is that better?
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I also want to applaud Governor Pritzker for saying that he wants to compromise. I get it. In part, this is about dreams and making dreams come true. Making more so you can do more things. However, in this case of the minimum wage bill, it's not helping the people of the state, nor is there any compromise, true compromise. There's been no real discussion. It's getting rammed through quickly, and my fear is that this bill is going to hurt the very people that we are trying to help today. Supporters have claimed multiple times that studies say the economy will not be impacted by raising the minimum wage. No job loss, no decrease in hours. But when we took up a similar bill just a couple of years ago in 2017, the NFIB Research Center crunched the numbers and concluded that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would result in the loss of over 93,000 jobs. And that's spread out through the state of Illinois, and mostly small business. Recently here, just a few weeks ago, the Central Illinois Regional Chamber legislative effort provided information as to how the proposed minimum wage increase will negatively, and I say negatively, affect Central Illinois. Out of more than 500 responses, 70% of those 500 will have to raise prices to cover costs. 63% will reduce hours for employees. Reductions, friends. 62% will slow down hiring new positions, and 48% will lay off employees. 17% potentially considering closing their doors, friends. Closing the doors, that means shutting the business down and go do something else. It appears that employers outside of Chicago are receiving the same consideration as employees within Chicago. Employers in Chicago have had 10 years to get to $15. Well, why are employers in the rest of the state only be giving half of that? And I don't have a good answer for that. Chicago is an international city. We all know that. It's a wonderful town. It almost entertains almost 60 million tourists and receives millions of dollars in hotels and food, beverages, shows. Just a wonderful place to go. But friends, downstate Illinois is just a little bit different. With many small communities that have to sustain themselves, we don't have that massive influx of money to afford such an increase in wages. Manufacturers in my district told me just a few days ago that there will be job losses, period. No study, no fancy economists, just more families with no jobs in our state. Recently, a restaurant owner in my district told me this. Some people, he said, come to me to work for me. They just do not have life skills. This is coming to work in a business. No life skills. They're not prepared. So the business owner spends time mentoring them, and he has become a safety net for some of his workers. And if this passes, he says he will not be able to offer 401k anymore. The money given to community groups, he says, like Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, it's all gone. It's all over. He can only raise the prices of sandwiches so much. And many of the people that come in to eat, don't forget this, folks, they also are on fixed incomes or don't have a lot to spare. A business owner who is a wife and mother of 3 told me she is tired of being the bad guy. Tired of being the bad guy. They put their heart and soul into their family business. She and her husband work on average 80 hours a week, and that's each, not total, each. And when averaged out, they don't make minimum wage. And friends, these are the owners. These are the owners. Ask about small farmers. Representative Meyer mentioned this a little bit ago. Current commodity prices are low and are dictated by the ebbs and flows of the global market. And friends, farmers cannot raise prices. They're locked in. They're already struggling with increased costs of seed and fertilizer, insurance, equipment, fuel, and labor, and it's getting harder and harder to make small families going. And this is going to hit the small farms squarely up front. A local school superintendent told me just a couple of days ago, you know the evidence-based funding model that we approved last year? He goes, you tie that in with minimum wage.
Representative Bennett, can you please make your final remark?
I sure will. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. So in essence, the minimum wage, friends, is another tax in the business world. The warning alarms are loud. You hear it from all kinds of places. Education, government, newspapers, Farm Bureau, IRMA, IMA, Chamber of Commerce, and NFIB. I ask, please, let's back up. We need a better answer. We need to work through this for both our workers and our businesses. There is a better answer. Let's find it together. Please vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Morgan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill, I just wanted to wish everyone happy Valentine's Day in the middle of this difficult debate, but I did want to stand and rise in support of this important legislation. This is important for moral reasons. This is important for fiscal reasons. The community in the 58th State Representative District supports this legislation. The businesses, the small businesses, the large businesses, the community, the working families, the working individuals in this community supports this bill, and I urge a yes vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Robinson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Senator Lightfoot Representative Guzzardi, Representative Evans, Representative Hoffman, Labor, and Governor J.B. Pritzker for their hard work on this bill. Representative Freese, I understand more than anyone, as a small business owner, how tough it is to stay afloat as a small business in the state of Illinois. But I currently pay my employees $15 an hour because it's the right thing to do. This bill is the first step in order to help families in Illinois make a wage to take care of their families. As we celebrate Black History Month, this is the civil rights issue of today. I ask that you vote yes for working families in Illinois. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Tarver for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, I actually did not plan to say anything, but it feels like the folks on my right are kind of coming after my colleague about not having a, not starting a business, not owning a business. And it seems like they're looking for a business owner, so I popped up to let them know, here's one, okay? So first of all, we opened our business in 2014. And since 2014, we've always paid at least $15 an hour. And this funny thing happened in 2018. We quadrupled our capacity, moved into a facility that was 4 times as large, and we're still in business. So this notion of $15 automatically puts you out of business is disingenuous, and it's just as irrelevant as a question to my colleague as to whether or not he owns his own business. You don't have to own a business to give people a fair shot. Okay, this is not about a minimum wage, this is about minimum dignity, minimum respect, and minimum appreciation for their hard work and their time. Time is the only thing you cannot get back. The only thing. You can make more money, you can start a new business, and if you think you're gonna automate or kiosk your way out of a situation into profitability, I ask you, do you own a business? And if so, what business do you know that's gonna kiosk, I'm using it as a verb, its way to profitability? Are you gonna go to somewhere and there's gonna be nothing but kiosks at a hotel? Who's gonna carry the bags? Who's gonna greet you? It's silly. It's time consuming, and it's just time to put it to rest. The bottom line is we owe these people a minimum amount of dignity, respect, and appreciation, and it's embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing and appalling that it's taking this long. So if you're looking for a business owner like my colleague from the 5th District who supports people and provides them a decent wage, you have another one over here. Happy to talk to you anytime.
Chair recognizes Representative Conyers-Irvin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. February 14th, 2019 is a day in history for Illinois that I am so proud to stand here as an Illinois House of Representatives. I know it's hard sometimes if you have not walked in the shoes of others. I know it's hard. Being raised by a single mother of 3 girls, I know what it means to have to even fight for a livable wage. And today we're talking about the minimum wage. My mother back home is watching, and she can say that Melissa stood up for working families of Illinois. My mother can be proud that she raised this young woman that watched her fight to stand up and fight for all working families. But I think what I'm even more so proud about is that my mother will be able to say that it wasn't just Melissa that did it today, but it was the men and women in the Illinois House of Representatives that put politics aside and put working families ahead. That's what I'm proud of today. So I thank you to the sponsor, thank you to the men and women in the Illinois House of Representatives. I am happy to serve in this legislature with you. And I ask that you would cast a yes vote for this legislation and put working families ahead of the agenda for Illinois. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Wheeler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates they will yield.
Will, I'm going to try and move through my comments as fast as you're trying to move this bill through this House. Tell me, which Republican House member was part of your negotiation?
Republican House member?
Yes, sir.
The entirety of this House, this Assembly, has contemplated this bill for 2 years,
So
Representative.
the answer is none.
We've had
There was
ample
no
time to debate
House
this
Republican member invited to the negotiations for this bill. Correct? Does it say correct? Because it's correct, and you know it. Will, has any other state ever contemplated, or actually in this case raised, the minimum wage by 33% in a single year?
Representative, I'm not certain about the percentages, but I know many states in this country are moving to a $15 minimum wage.
Are they
And I think
moving
many
to
of them
it? Are they
moving
doing it in a ramp that's this
quite
fast?
fast.
We're going from 30% in a single year. You don't have any information that shows that's ever happened, right?
I'll be happy to look into it for you, Representative.
Okay, great. I looked into it last night for several hours, frankly. I couldn't find anything in the study that you had sent us, which means that all that we're basing this on is speculation of what you want to have happen, because this has never been done before. Never been done before. We keep talking, in this case for you, about this macro concept here. Macro meaning the whole state. I'm concerned about downstate Illinois with how this bill is being rammed through and ramped up. Here's why. If your projections that are based on speculation don't come true, that there is not job growth and job increase of wages overall for downstate Illinois, are you willing to, in 3 years, come back and look and see maybe we should make an adjustment for downstate Illinois, a regionalized approach to this?
Representative, I can guarantee you that there will be an increase in wages as a result of this bill, because the people who are making $8.25 aren't going to be making $8.25 anymore. There's going to be a wage increase.
Hold on.
So
You're a
if-
macro guy
If for
now.
some reason
You're all
people are
about
still
macro.
making $8.25
Hold on. I
in
only
3
have a minute.
years, I will happily come back here and reconsider this measure.
Okay, we're talking about macro wages, which means that there's job loss versus the wage increase that's still a net wage loss. That's what I'm talking about. I'm concerned about that. To the bill. I know that the sponsor is not interested in the anecdotal evidence, but I'm going to provide some anecdotal evidence anyway, because this is real. The social service agencies in my district that I've reached out to have universally come back and said that they will have a negative impact, that they'll have to raise more funds, in spite of the fact that they are getting a promise from the state of Illinois to get more revenue from us in a budget that we've never really balanced. My school districts have said that over the next, and this is just 5 out of the 9 school districts that I represent, have said in 5 years this will cost at least $6 million more than what they're paying right now for the minimum wage increase. That has to impact our property taxes. We are not obviously raising our income for them from the state fast enough. What I'm really concerned about here is what we say to every employer who can either no longer compete and has to either move or close their doors. And I know that the sponsor is not in favor of this part of it, but I have talked to several who are very concerned that they will not be able to compete. Like my friend Representative Meyer mentioned, they don't get to set their own prices in every case. They have to compete interstate, not just intrastate. We don't live in a bubble. What do we say to that employer when they've spent their entire life putting together a business that hired people and gave them an opportunity? As my friend Representative Murphy had mentioned, he gave people a chance. They went on to become bigger things because they had the opportunity to afford an entry-level wage. We're taking some of that away today. Kid yourself if you want to, but this will hurt some people at the entry-level part of our wage spectrum. And what do you say to that former employee who can't have that job anymore? Of course, you don't know what to say to an employee that never had a job because they didn't get a chance to start. It was mentioned before about a trip to McDonald's being a special trip. I get that. My trip to McDonald's was to go to work in 1984, making the minimum wage of $3.34. But we aren't going to be able to say anything to those people because they're not going to have the chance. So talking to this bill for the last 2 years is not the same as negotiating. We have to be honest with ourselves and realize this bill has untold consequences that have never been studied by anyone anywhere. It's all speculation based on wonderful ideas. But we're rushing through a massive impact bill in record time. in record time.
Representative Wheeler, please make your final remark.
Sir. However well-intentioned this bill is, House members like me today are limited to 5 minutes on the floor to make the case that this bill directly jeopardizes real companies, real jobs, built by and held by real people. And the lost opportunities for those people are coming soon. We need to find a balance between employers and employees that makes sense. Rushing a bill like this does not make sense. Please vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative McCombie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that he will yield.
You had stated in your opening remarks that you've been negotiating this bill for 2 years, and Representative Wheeler had just asked who on our side of the aisle was part of that negotiations, and unfortunately, I don't think he gave you enough time to give us a name.
Representative McCombie, you and I and Representative Wheeler and our colleagues in this chamber have been discussing this concept ad nauseum for 2 years. We presented a bill that does almost exactly what the bill before you does today. You voted on that bill. I voted on that bill. That bill has been before this body. There is nothing in here that's a surprise. There's nothing in here that's a gotcha. This is legislation that we have talked about and talked about and talked about, and it is now finally time for us to act upon it. And I'm proud that that moment has finally come.
Well, I can tell you 110% I have not sat at a negotiation table with you or anybody about this bill. Or over the last 2 years that I was here as a freshman. Everybody's talking about this being a moral issue. Yes, this is a moral issue. It's immoral to continue to raise our property taxes and keep people house poor. It's immoral to continue to underfund our K through 12 schools by $11.8 billion, and which we should fully fund, and when we fully fund that, then we're going to go ahead and raise that gap of those folks that are entry level to a higher level of pay. It's immoral to hurt our seniors with higher costs without mirroring any sort of raise for them. It's immoral for you not to consider our communities. Vote no.
Chair recognizes Leader Durkin.
I really don't know where to start, but wow. I'd like to know what happened. It's February 14th. We're fresh off a new administration, new General Assembly, new attitudes, new momentum, new perspective, a sense of cooperation. Does any of that sound familiar? How about this? The new administration promises political unity, pledges bipartisanship in the approach towards governing. And here's another one. Here's a quote from our inauguration, from your leader. If we set a tune in this session where we recognize the state has got some serious problems, we should get together, people working with people to solve the problems. What happened? It's only been a month. Do we have serious problems? Of course we do. Out-migration. We're number one in the nation. It's nothing to be proud of. We have high areas of unemployment through the state of Illinois. Danville is at 6.4%. Rockford, 6.3%, and the Metro East is over 5%. All border communities in our state. We also have an extreme lack of confidence with state government through our citizens. No matter where you go in the state over the last 2 years, people have said loud and clear, work it out. Figure things out, get things done together. And that's my sincere goal. I've always been that way. I made that very clear in my speech at the inauguration. I asked for good faith, goodwill, reasonableness, and a fair shake. I also said if you meet those requests, you will have a partner. Boy, have things changed since that speech. Senate Bill 1 may be the most significant policy change in this state in many, many years. We, as the House Republicans, we represent 4.8 million citizens in the state of Illinois. And those 4.8 million citizens and the 44 representatives in our side of the aisle are basically being told, take it or leave it. The impact and consequences of this legislation will affect every Illinoisan, every worker, every employer, public, private, nonprofit, charity, you name it. But today, February 14th, this rush, and I repeat, this rush to pass this bill is nothing less than breathtaking. Now, I recall, and I look at these things, that we have a number of freshmen and also progressive members of this body who proclaimed during the campaigns that they are here to break the status quo. We're not going to have business as usual. This is an open process. I know you. I know who said those statements. Your vote today is a strikeout. I'm telling you right now, we can negotiate a better product. We are 50 days away from adjourning. We got plenty of time to do this. And this bill doesn't even go into effect until next January. But we have to get it done today when we've been shut out of negotiations. Representative McCombie and Wheeler both told you they had absolutely nothing, no influence, no one approached them about working out on this bill. It flies in the face of everything that was said a month ago about how we're going to work together, we're going to get things done, we're going to stop this craziness that's gone on over the past 4 years. We're getting back to the old business right now, and that's unfortunate. The process with which this bill has gone is wrong, and it's not fair to those who are going to have to live with it. You've heard the statements in committee, you've heard them from your constituents about what it's going to do to them and how the financial impact will affect them. And that was not prepared by political partisans. Those are statements that came from real people, real employers who live in this state but feel that the American dream in Illinois is no longer within reach. Well, I'll tell you also, there was a discussion earlier about these economists. I'll tell you what, I bet we can look into their backgrounds, and none of these economists have ever had an experience of creating a job or making payroll once in their life. I've seen this before, and I think it's the same thing. So let's not put a lot of weight into that. Now, I also said back a little bit ago that this is a time for us not to be a General Assembly, but this is a time for us to be a great assembly. I guess shame on me for having this optimistic attitude. I have a friend, here's my story, owns a car wash in DuPage County. It's a full-service car wash, 26 employees. His employees love coming to work every day, and he operates on a very thin margin. He told me yesterday this bill goes through. Within 2 years, he will have to change to be a fully automated car wash, exterior only, and he will have to fire 23 people because of this bill. That's reality, folks, and I trust his economics a lot more than these economists, these so-called experts, who are talking how this is going to have a positive effect in Illinois. So I'm going to finish up by saying, usually I'll say, don't vote for this bill. I'm asking you to vote your district. That's all I'm asking for you. But I'm going to make it very clear, you've got the majority, you've got plenty of votes. This is not the way to start off the General Assembly when we're making such an important policy decision that has basically taken the Republicans and been told your interests and your thoughts are not valid and we don't care.
Members, a verification has been requested by Representative Grant Worley. Please be at your seat to vote your switch. The question is, shall Senate Bill 1 pass? Oh, excuse me. Representative Guzzardi, would you like to close?
I'd love to get a word or two in edgewise here. Thank you. I'll be very brief, colleagues. Thank you for the very thorough debate. I was called a socialist and sassy in the same debate. This is a banner day for me. There's a lot of details and facts that I could go back in and relitigate and rehash, but I want to conclude by saying the following. So in 1967, in this country, the rate of poverty among senior citizens was almost 30%. Almost 30%, so practically 1 in 3 seniors in this country is poor. By 1975, 8 years later, that poverty rate had fallen by almost half. You might be wondering, how did we accomplish such a remarkable reduction in elder poverty, addressing such a huge problem so quickly? What we did was we started paying out more in Social Security. In fact, we nearly doubled the Social Security benefit per capita during that span of time. And I tell you this story to make the following point. My colleagues across the aisle have spoken a lot today about wanting to lift people out of poverty, and I appreciate that they genuinely intend that. But there's only one way to stop being poor, friends. There's only one way. It's not to go to college or to pick your chin up or to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, not to disparage any of those things, but that's not a way to stop being poor. The only way to stop being poor is to have more money. The only way to stop being poor is to have more money. That's how we lifted those millions of seniors out of poverty in the 60s and 70s. We gave them more money and then they weren't poor anymore. And that's what this legislation is going to do. The working poor in our state are going to have more money. We will treat their labor with the dignity and respect it deserves, and we will allow them to provide a better standard of living for themselves and their families. Many of those workers are here with us today in the gallery. I commend these leaders and the leaders around the state and across the country who have led the fight for 15. You all have stirred our nation's conscience. You have redefined the conventional wisdom. You have led this fight from the streets to the Capitol. The victory here is yours, and it's my humblest honor and privilege to carry your fight into this chamber. And to my colleagues on the floor, my message to you all is simple. Be brave. Do what's right. Not what's right for the loudest voices or the most politically influential voices. Do what's right for the people who need us the most. The people working as hard as they can. The people stuck in the hamster wheel of work and debt and poverty. 1.4 million Illinoisans are counting on you today. Do what's right and vote aye. Thank you.
Again, members, a verification has been requested by Representative Worley. Please be at your seat to vote your switch. The question is, shall Senate Bill 1 pass? All in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On a count of 69 voting in favor, 47 voting opposed, and 1 voting present. Mr. Clerk, will you please read the names of those voting in the affirmative? Okay. Mr. Clerk, the verification has been withdrawn. And on a count of 69 voting in favor, 47 voting opposed, and 1 voting present, Senate Bill 1, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Representative Harris, you are recognized on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to acknowledge on this historic day for the working families of Illinois that we have been joined on the floor of the House by the Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Juliana Stratton.
Welcome to the chamber.